The other bit about India, and let me be a little cynical about this. Whatever happens in India, I mean, we have a lot of problems in domestic politics. For instance, we have a whole bunch of political parties. There have been instances of growth, malfeasance in a number of areas, and we'll sort of get to that. But these broking houses, these investment banks like Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch or Goldman Sachs, I mean, whatever this happens, and there's a scare that this is going to sort of take a toll on growth, I mean, going the way of Russia or Indonesia and Suharto, there would invariably be a little note coming from Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch saying that the structural India story is alive and well. And one of the sort of key elements that they point out of the structural story is the business of the demographic dividend. And let me sort of try to get you to talk by asking you what's the problem apart from the earthquake and Fukushima, right? What are the long-term problems that the Japanese economy faces? It's an aging population, right? So I've never really figured out, and maybe one of you can help me with this. What is the opposite of aging? I call it de-aging. Does that work for you? So, the story of India, while Japan's problem is one of an aging population, right? Where there's the dependency rate. There are more old people than young people, right? And the problems associated with the sort of medical support, all sorts of other support needed for older people, and fewer younger people to generate the income, to provide the support. In India, it's going exactly the other way. And if you want, so that's the simple story. But if you want to see it in terms of fancy chart, this is sort of the bell which represents the population distribution, male, female. Right? So if the bulge in the middle, right, it's good because the middle is really the working age population. Yeah. So you will notice that if you look at projection, in 2008 the bell was it was fattish, but it didn't have really this huge bulge. Right? But over the next 2 years, the bulge really it really gets a sort of a beer gut. Yeah? And that's good for it because that shows you that the working age population is growing. What can you think of as the potential benefits of having a young population in terms of specific support to the economy? What are the two things that are likely to happen? Which happened in China, which happened in Korea a couple of decades back. Two things. Greater savings. Yeah? So one of the things, so young people tend to, there is a life cycle of savings, and young people and working people tend to save more. So the savings pool really increases. The other is, of course, the labor market thing. Right? You have a supply of cheaper and cheaper workers coming into the labor pool. And if you want to sort of reduce the China story, China has a very complex story and it shouldn't be sort of analyzed so simplistically. But if you want to reduce it to a single story, it's really about a very young workforce, right, who, because of the way the labor market was handled, provided cheaper and cheaper labor and made other economies uncompetitive. And that sort of seems to be the way India is. Please. Not necessarily. It really depends on what the cheap labor does. So if they produce a lot of goods and services, right, which they can sell all over the world, which is what China did, right, and the growth rate of the goods and services do is faster than the growth rate of population, then you effectively have the increase in per capita GDP. But if these guys can't be employed and they're just sort of hanging around, right, the GDP is not growing adequately, right, you have a drag on your per capita. Which is actually, I mean, you sort of raised a very important issue which I'll sort of get to, is that in these models which you will see, I mean, if you read stuff on India or China and Asia, the assumption that a lot of things are almost automatic. Yeah. You talk about the demographic dividend, I mean, a de-aging population, and that's supposed to, get you all the growth that you need. That's not necessarily the case. You need skills. You need these guys to be skilled. Right? You need enough job opportunities for them. So there are a lot of challenges that need to be surmounted in order to sort of really reach the demographic dividend. Right? And the demographic dividend could potentially be a demographic nightmare. Yeah? And if you look at what's happening in North Africa, to an extent, it's a bit of Egypt, Tunisia, much smaller economy. One of the things that's happening in both Middle East and North Africa is a very, very similar phenomenon, right? Which is the aging population. Right? I was giving a talk in Istanbul in October, and this was sort of the Arab banking conference, and I'm speaking there. And the big sort of thing that these guys were trying to push was the idea of these frontier markets like the Middle East. But what happens in Egypt is exactly what could potentially happen in China or India. You had a more and more youthful population, the aging population, not enough opportunity for governance, right? Not enough jobs to go around, not enough education to go around. So it led to a huge social problem. So the limited point that I would like to make, to sort of take away from this, if you wish, is if in the Western press you hear this demographic dividend business, it's there, it's very much a driver, but take it with a pinch of salt, because there are risks to having a young population. If you can't employ them, if you can't give them the opportunities that are very critical for them to participate in the production process. And that, I presume, is what ultimately your point. Sorry, yes, go ahead.
So how would India's infrastructure handle the increase in population that would suggest?
I'm just forgetting this. Yeah, so, I mean, this is fairly obvious. If you have favorable demographics and you manage to employ them, you would have your product penetration for a number of these categories would increase. And one of the ways to sort of gauge or assess the potential of an economy in terms of market opportunity is to look at sort of the number of products per 1,000 persons and how it sort of stacks up with the rest of the world. And you will notice that for things like cars, India is, despite fairly strong growth, this is a slightly dated thing, but this is the only comparison we got. The lines have extended a bit. But we are still sort of way behind a lot of our peers. Telecom penetration has been phenomenal, but we're still behind China in terms of. So as you have a more youthful population, hopefully they get jobs. They spend more on things like cars, cell phones, and so on. So the potential is there. And that's why virtually every sort of car maker in the world is there in China or in India. And the number of models, etc., that are available is just increasing exponentially. So we have Ford, we have GM, we have all the Japs here, we have the Koreans here, we have the Germans here now with Volkswagen, and so on. But the problem, and I think you sort of really hit the nail on the head, is that are we doing enough? Right. And the issue that you raised, well, there's a problem of physical infrastructure, and there's, of course, a problem of social infrastructure. And I think the next slide is a little alarming. And as I said, I'm not here to make a marketing pitch for the Indian economy market, right? I'm going to give you a very objective assessment of what the situation is on the ground. And the fact is that in terms of a number of social indicators, which ultimately sort of tell you what the state of social infrastructure is, which helps this de-aging population, this youthful population, become an effective part of the workforce, we are very much behind where we should be. And I sort of use a couple of indicators here in terms of literacy, infant mortality, etc. Social infrastructure is very, very poor. I mean, there is a conscious effort by the government to change this, to put more and more money into health and education, to get a private sector response, to get... What has happened is that most of these things are being controlled largely by the state. There's been quite a sort of a miserable failure of the state in a number of these areas, which these charts should tell you. Yeah? But there is a very, very serious problem with the supply of health care and education in India. For the cynical businessmen, right, this is a great opportunity. So a lot of universities, both from, particularly from Europe, also from the US, unfortunately, most of the universities from the US are the dodgier ones, right, who are setting up shop in India. Right? And ditto for healthcare. You have a fairly educated pool of doctors. So state-provided healthcare is abysmal, and that's an understatement. So there is this huge opportunity to participate in the health and education sector. Those of you who are involved with those businesses should look at the fine print of the policies that either allow you or constrain you in certain areas. But this is a huge problem, and a number of economists, including myself, have been pointing out that let's not get so carried away by this business of the demographic dividend. We've got to do a lot of things to ensure that favorable demographic actually produces a dividend rather than a lifetime. Not exact opposite.